Welcome to the second part of the second Sunday series by Sage Singers. I'm glad you're all here. We think that we're a unique group of senior LGBTQAs, and we all have our stories. And today we're going to celebrate one of our own remarkable lives by one of our own singers, another one. Dr. Don Johnson, a retired psychologist. Carol and I have known for, close to 40 years. And Carol and I were at a concert last night in Boulder by Residents, the women's chorus. Featured a lot of poetry by Mary Oliver and her famous line, "What will you do with your one wild and precious life?" And today we're going to hear about what Don Johnson has done with his one wild and precious life. So, Don, it's all yours.
What immediately hit me was I've gone from being a Mormon missionary to being here with my family, you know. Yeah. And actually, I'm the youngest of four sons in a family where the John Birch Society is left of center quite a ways. Unbelievably conservative. Grew up in southern Idaho. My grandfather on my mother's side homesteaded Teton Basin right beneath the Great Tetons, 2,000 acres. There wasn't even electricity, and certainly not indoor plumbing when I was a kid and went there to visit. Very much of a pioneer family. The last thing my mother said to me every morning as I left for school was, "Don't forget, you represent the church." You know, and I just was terrified. Didn't want to swear or fart or anything like that, you know, because it would look bad on the church. But that pioneer spirit was very much a part of my world and the heritage that I had. And it set me up for an awful lot of stuff. My oldest brother was a member of the Aryan Nation. When I say conservative, I mean conservative here. The brother just older than me is the mastermind behind the mobile phone system for Bell Labs. Brilliant electrical engineer. When he got my coming out letter, he called me and he said, "I have a question and you need to answer it." And I said, "Well, I'll tell you what, you ask the question and I'll decide whether I answer it or not." And he said, "Have you ever acted on this?" I said, "That's absolutely none of your business." And then he softened, kind of. And he said, "Well, please tell me." And I said, "Well, yeah." And then he said, "That's too bad, because if you hadn't, I could come and kill you before you did and save your soul."
Oh my God.
And this is a brilliant man. And he absolutely believed that. I remember hanging up the phone and thinking, thank God I acted on it before I talked to him. Anyway, a super conservative background and family. Bachelor's and master's from Brigham Young University. 1,000 memories come back. One that I hadn't really planned on, but I'll throw in because it fits so well. By the time I was a freshman in college, I was desperately trying to figure out who I was in terms of sexuality. And all of the books on homosexuality in the BYU library were in the reserved edition section, which meant you had to go up and check each one out, and the librarian would go get them and come and hand them to you. And so I was reading like crazy, and after about 2 weeks, BYU security came to my door. I'm a freshman in the dormitory, and said, "We want to know why you're studying and getting these books from the reserve section. We've looked at your schedule. You have absolutely no reason to be doing that." And I remember being just absolutely terrified. You know, and so I came up with something about a friend of mine who was worried about his sexual orientation, and I was trying to help him out. And they said, you send him to his bishop and let the church take care of that, and you mind your own business. But what I learned was, you know, don't push the envelope. Don't go very far with everything. I'm going to jump ahead an awful lot. Because it ties in with this point. Years after I'd come out, and there'd been lots of publicity and things about me, I got a phone call from a Mormon bishop, a gay Mormon bishop, asking if we could meet. And I was sort of used to that by that point. People were calling. The gay married men, the gay Mormons would call, could we meet at the corner of 17th and Pearl at midnight? You know, they had a name and somebody they could contact, but they were light years away from like going to a community center or anything like that. And so once he and I got together, I was a little cocky about everything, and I said, so, how did you find out about me? What did you do? Go to gaymormon.com? Ha ha ha. And he said, yeah, pretty much. And then he said, oh yeah, the church has a file to stick on you. There's your coming out letter, there's all of the newspaper articles about you, there's the detective reports. And I said, the what? Oh, the detective reports. The church had you followed for about 3 months. I said, why? So that they would have something on you in case you got to be too much of a problem, too much of a thorn in their side. And I thought, okay, you know, I understand the system and the lesson, and I know what all of that means. To say my family is conservative is beyond the pale. I remember vividly when I was a freshman at Brigham Young University and went to the first opening session for all of the new students, and the university president got up, and among other things in the welcome he said, if by any chance you are homosexual, you are not welcome here. Go to the bursar's office and we'll give you a full refund. If you don't do it by today, when we catch you, we will kick you out. We do not want you and your kind here. And you will get no refund at that point. So this is the liberal world I grew up in, pretty much. I found out much later that my family had talked about me probably being gay from the time I was about 11 or 12. And they had figured it out, and suddenly my father was bonding with me like crazy. We were going on trips together. He was a railroad engineer for Union Pacific, what they called a yard engineer. He'd shift things, break the trains apart, and put the new ones back together. He wasn't out on the long trips on the road. And suddenly we were going on trips together, and there was all this bonding stuff going on, and I didn't understand. Then I realized that, you know, they were simply victims of the Freudian view of what was going on for a child at that particular period of life, and they were trying to fix me in some way. Apparently when I actually got married or told my family I was engaged, my mother said to one of my older brothers, how do you tell somebody they shouldn't get married? So at some level she knew and she understood, but it was also the era where it was her fault if there was a son who was gay, and so there was just sort of nothing that she could do with it or be able to put together. So anyway, Brigham Young University, 1 year off to a mission for the Mormon Church for 2.5 years in French-speaking countries, France, Belgium, and Switzerland. Then coming back, hitting the ground running, and I'm going to get through the university and get on the road in life as fast as I possibly can. Non-negotiable commitment and requirement for a Mormon male: you must marry. Mormons marry not just till death do you part, but for time and all eternity. That's what the Mormon temples are about. That's where you go to make that happen. My high school girlfriend had gotten married while I was in France, Belgium, and Switzerland, so she was no longer available. And I set out to fill the task of finding a wife and getting married. My ex-wife is a wonderful person, and we fit really, really well. An aside on the asides here now. The first time that she and my husband got together, they were in the living room visiting and chatting and talking, and I was in the kitchen fixing stuff, and about 10 minutes into the whole thing, I thought, oh shit, I married the same person twice. And later I asked my kids, have you noticed how much Eric and your mother are alike? And to a person they said, duh, you know, which I very awkwardly once tried to explain to my wife was really a compliment to her. She didn't quite see it that way. Okay, let's see. Did my PhD work at the University of Minnesota. Had my first gay experience there. World turned upside down. I didn't know what to do with it. It became instantly a question of repentance and fixing my life. And then there'd be this script in my head. Oh, by the way, a backtrack. Heterosexual sex did not work for me. I had to learn how to do it. It was terrifying that it didn't work, and I was extremely proud of myself that I figured out how to make it work. And I say things like this, indeed do be very cautious, because my ex-wife is a wonderful person. But, you know, that wasn't the issue. It wasn't her attractiveness, it was who I was and how I was wired and how I was scripted. So eventually I did figure out how to make that work. But the first time I stumbled into a situation where I had my first gay experience, the heavens opened and the Mormon Tabernacle Choir sang. You know, it was like, oh, yeah, this is what I've been waiting for. And then immediately the guilt would come in. I will never, ever, ever, ever do that again. Tomorrow, I'm back. Sometimes there would be huge gaps, and then once a family was begun, it bounced back and forth quite a bit. Got my job at the University of Colorado, moved there, and was hell-bent on absolutely making everything clean, pure, and working. I ended up being asked to teach the human sexuality class at the University of Colorado. Actually, I created it. I was the first one who was teaching it. It became immensely popular. I had like 500 students a semester in the class.
What year was that?
That would have been like, mid-1960s. Okay. There was one student, Anthony, who came in during office hours and told me immediately he was gay and kept dropping these hints that he had figured out that I was gay. And given where I was, I'm trying to stay in the church, I'm trying to hide everything, you know, that was absolutely terrifying. That I was that visible, that, you know, people could know immediately what it was about. One day, I should throw in a piece that I am neither proud nor ashamed of. I, over the years, occasionally did tricking, where, you know, I'd have anonymous sexual encounters with men. Feel terribly guilty about it, vow never to do it again, be back a week later doing it again, and being sure I would figure out some way to make things work. One of the elements of that was I was a psychotherapist, studied every theory that ever came out about homosexual development. I had a new theory every semester that I taught in my human sexuality class about it, and was sure that eventually I would figure out what this whole thing was about. But then the theory never They always fell apart, and I don't have a new one. So anyway, Anthony had been a student of mine, came in, let me know that he knew I was gay. I kept avoiding a conversation about it with him in any way. And finally, one day, during my office hours, he was sitting there and he said, "Why are you doing this? You know that I know." And I can remember the blood draining out of my head and my hands tightening on the arms of the chair. And it was like, my secret is going to be out, my life is going to be destroyed, etc., etc., etc. He took a long sigh. He walked over to me in my chair, picked me up, put his hands under my arms, lifted me up, and kissed me. And I'd never kissed a man before. It had never been intimate. It had been physical. And that was it. And he looked up and he said, "You and I are going to have an affair. I'm going to take care of you, and it's going to be okay."
Wow.
And I just nodded my head. And then, as corny as it sounds, junior high, I fell head over heels in love, probably for the first time in my life. I mean, I would wait for him outside his classroom door. I would buy him, okay, it was wonderful, it was terrible at the same time. This was the early 1970s, counterculture, free love, everything wide open, exploding in terms of sexuality. After about 3 weeks, he said, "Well, that was fun, goodbye." And I had fallen in love, you know. And what do you mean goodbye? Well, I'm in a relationship. "Well, you can't do that to me." And he said, "You're in a relationship too, and you're doing it to me." And I said, and upside down. And I remember a couple of nights later after work, wandering over in Boulder to the apartment building where he lived, sitting in the hallway outside his door, listening to him and his partner, just living, you know, joking, talking about the day and what it was like. And I remember thinking, this is what I want. You know, I want to live with a man, I want to be with a man, and it's too late. And then I started putting the suicide plans together. And it had to look like an accident, so there would be insurance money for the family, blah, 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 blah. I had a place up on Flagstaff Mountain where I was going to drive the car off the cliff. Had it set up so it made sense for me to have been up there. I tried 3 times. Every time I'd come to the corner, I'd think, forgive me, but this isn't the right way to put it. I'm just going to fuck this up and I'll be a gay quadriplegic for the rest of my life. And that night I went home, crawled into bed, and my wife actually said, "I know that something awful is going on for you. Please share, please talk about it." And I said, "Okay, it's time." And I turned and she saw the look on my face and said, "No, I've changed my mind. Don't. I don't ever want to know, whatever it is. Please don't tell me." And it took many, many years till finally we were able to put the pieces together. If you're aware of an academic program called Semester at Sea, it was called World Campus Afloat at one point. I taught on that twice. A fantastic experience. Went around the world for an academic semester. My family went with me. We, Northern Hemisphere, Southern Hemisphere. But the first point in the first voyage where we were in a town where there would be a Mormon church on Sunday was Hong Kong. And so we went to church. And just right about 4 days before that, I had been on duty checking the students in and off of the ship so we'd know who was where. And a work study student had been assigned to me. I didn't realize at the time that he'd requested to be assigned to me. Beautiful 19-year-old California, tall, 6'4" blonde. Let me know almost immediately that he was gay. And we started sort of to dance throughout the evening, the gay men at least will recognize here, of what's possible, what isn't possible here. And just as our shift ended, he said, "You have an office, don't you?" Privacy on a ship is almost non-existent. I said, "Yeah, I've got an office." He said, "You want to show me?" Okay. And we both knew what was coming up, you know. And so there was a beginning of an involvement now, and a lot of guilt, but still a contact that was real and maybe even had some potential. I didn't know. The Sunday morning after that, we go to the Mormon church. British and Australian congregation mainly. And the guy who's teaching the adult Sunday school class it's a woman, I'm sorry, is taking a very liberal spin on just about everything, a couple of scriptures. And she's saying, well, you know, I think it appears that they're saying this here, but I think what the prophet really means is this. And then where a very rigid theological concept was suddenly a very liberal theological concept. And without even thinking about it, I raised my hand and said, wait a minute, what's said here in the scripture is black and white, as clear as can be. Why don't we call a spade and say, I don't believe that, rather than trying to pretend it says something that it doesn't say. I don't think you believe it, I know I don't believe it. Absolute quiet in the Sunday school class. I turn and look at my wife who's sitting beside me. Her mouth is open, and I realize I've left the system. I'm on my way out, and I've turned a corner, you know, and it was, oh my God, it's wrapping up, it's over. And I knew that life had changed from that moment on. Actually went on a second semester at sea voyage to come out to my wife. And it's in a way kind of crappy to have done that because it trapped her. But that's why I did it also, because I knew that if I told her in Boulder, she'd call her parents, they'd be there in 24 hours, they'd take her and the kids, and we'd never have a chance to work anything through. So second voyage was to come out, which I did. Immensely painful for both of us. We figured out how to go from that point on. I started going out to the men's coming out group Monday night for gay men. Came into Denver from Boulder. And little by little, the changes started to happen. And that's going to lead for the first march for gay and lesbian rights back in 1979. March on Washington, D.C. And I was a born-again gay, and I would not miss it for anything on the face of the earth. 5 of my friends and I drove from Boulder to Washington to march. The march also occurred on the day of my excommunication at my request from the Mormon Church. That starts at 6 a.m. in Boulder. The march starts at 9 in Washington, D.C. With the time difference between Boulder and Washington, the march began just as the trial ended, and I left the church. And as I was looking, we parked the car and we were moving toward the staging area, and I kept thinking, my whole life is wrapping up. I don't know where it goes from here. 10 more minutes, 5 more minutes. We stepped on the mall. I looked at my watch, and it was 7 a.m. in Boulder, and I thought, it's over, I'm out. And I know how corny this is going to sound, but I started to quietly cry. And at that very moment, I looked up, and 2 men were unfurling this huge banner that said, Gay Mormons United.
Wow.
And I ran to them and I said, I talked about my story. And I was just blubbering like a baby. And one of the men took me in his arms and held me. And then he stepped back and he said, "No tears, congratulations, welcome home." And all the pieces fell in place. I was home again. And then I came back from the March on Washington, went into my boss, who sort of knew what was going on, and said, "I'm coming out in staff meeting." And he said, "Well, let's talk about it." I said, I'm informing you, I'm not requesting permission, I'm sorry. So I came out in staff meeting, and then in my human sexuality class, I had a guest speaker just in case I didn't get back from the march in time. And so I asked her if I could have the last 10 minutes of class. And word had gotten out in the gay community that I was going to come out in class. And so there's an extra 200 people.
Wow.
The fire marshal just would have been perplexed as all get out, but the place is jammed to the hilt. So I tell people why I've been to Washington, D.C. and what was going on, and who I am, and how they need to be able to see me from this point on. One other thing. I had an appointment with the chancellor right after the class was over and I'd heard through the grapevine that I was going to be offered a vice chancellorship. And by the time I got back to my office, word had already gotten to the chancellor, and there was a phone message saying, we'll get back to you, cancel the meeting today. You know. And while there are tons of gay and lesbian faculty, staff, and administrators at the university, nobody was public at that point. You know, so I'd broken one of the rules. I'd stepped over a line. I would have made a terrible administrator, so the university was in better shape for not having me there. But it was also a reminder of some of the problems and the dangers that can be part of the whole system. Okay, I better move ahead.
You're fine. We have 5 minutes, Don.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
if you have any ending statements,
Yes.
but also I want to give people time to ask any questions.
Okay. I will do a 2-sentence intro. Oh, one last story. I'm going to cut 2 or 3 of them out. Each of my brothers has at least one gay kid.
Even the Aryan Nation?
The Aryan Nation, too.
Wow.
His only son, 6'4" bodybuilder, and I had been down visiting him and drove the car back and stopped off at Winnemucca, Nevada to stay the night. And then I literally got to the motel office and I thought, no, I haven't gone far enough. And so I got back in the car and I drove to St. George, Utah, where the first Mormon temple in the West was finished. They called it, St. George was a Dixie, and they grew cotton down there and all kinds of crops. But it had great emotional and kind of historical meaning to me. So I go to the Bureau of Information for the temple, and one of the sweet old guides is trying to proselytize me. And I say, look, I'm a gay ex-Mormon, okay? And he said, well, I'm very happy too. And I said, no, you don't understand, I'm a homosexual. Oh! And he disappears. So on the way in, I had noticed this girl sitting on the steps, teenage, like maybe 20, just sitting there. And I went out and I stood at the bottom of the steps. She got up and she came down toward me. And she said, I have this overwhelming urge that I'm supposed to talk to you. And I did my caution, protection sort of a thing. And I said, no, I don't think you want to talk to me. I'm a gay ex-Mormon. Her hand went to her heart and then to her breathing, and she said, Actually, I think you're supposed to talk to me. My brother just came out to the family. We are totally lost. We don't know what to do. So I got her in touch with PFLAG, and told her how much her brother needed her to be there for him and to help through this time and this problem and this difficulty with the whole thing. I don't think I have ever given a public talk or something, but what the calls don't come afterwards, saying, would you meet me at midnight? Could we talk about this? Because finally they have a name and they're not ready yet for the community center or something like this. So I suppose if somebody asked me, I'd say I'm an agnostic now. But every once in a while, something like the St. George Temple thing will happen. And I think, maybe not. We'll check this out. We'll stick with it and see a little bit here. It has been a fantastic trip. I couldn't be happier to be who and where I am. And you are my family now. So, thank you.
I just told Jan, Kevin's not here today, so Jan is going to be our guest conductor. But I just asked if we can start 5 minutes late. So let's take 5 minutes if anybody has any questions for Don.
Anything? Oh, I was even marvelously
Well, what
thorough.
about today?
I'm terribly boring.
No. What about today? Are you with somebody?
Oh yeah, my husband and I have been together 30 years. Did I tell you about him and my ex-wife?
Oh, yeah.
That's also, yeah. And he's Japanese American and very kind of formal. The kids adore him. Life is wonderful, actually, right now. Okay.
Buffy has her hand up and then Tim.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing such
Yeah.
a beautiful story. It has been just, it's opened my heart. And I want to thank you so
Oh,
much for your reading.
You're very welcome, and I appreciate it.
And I feel that way too. I'm curious if there was ever any healing with your biological family, if there was ever able to be anything.
Actually, yes. My oldest brother, before he died,
The area?
the area, I went to visit, and as by then he had found out that he had a gay son, okay? And as we went to the airport, he said, I do not understand this gay shit. I just do not understand it at all. It makes no sense to me. And I thought, shut up, it is not time for homosexuality 101 here. The man is dying, he doesn't have much time. Just listen and say, I appreciate that it's very difficult, blah, 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 blah. But we made peace. And it was beautiful peacemaking, actually. The other two brothers, the Bell Labs guy, no, that will never happen. And then the middle brother, he and his wife, when they got my coming out letter, actually came to Boulder to save me. And we sat in my living room and talked for hours and hours and hours. And there was a point where I knew that he understood, that he was hearing me, he was listening. And then he went like this, and he said, I don't know about any of that, I just know right's right and wrong's wrong. And I thought, if he accepts that the church has made a mistake about homosexuality, what about everything else? And it just pulls the carpet right out from under his life, and I can't do that to him. So we have no contact, essentially. We're civil if we cross paths, but that's only at funerals now. So, pretty much that.
What about
Yeah,
his
time for one more question. That's
Okay.
it.
Do they have relationship?
Who have a relationship?
The brother you're just talking about and his son?
Yes, yes, yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
I want to thank Don for, these talks, starting with Christine, and then before that, Kate, enlightening us about what queer theory is. Everybody in this everybody in this room has a story, and if you'd like to tell your story, it doesn't have to be dramatic. It might be a subject that you want to talk about that's interesting, or your own personal story. Could you please see Judith? And she's our scheduler, and we'd be happy to accommodate you. I mean, these have been really enlightening, and thank you very much, Don. Give a standing ovation.